This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.
Welcome to the Local Election 2025, the OI podcast mini-series, brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society NZ Te Aoparangi. Our aim is to demystify the voting process, encourage participation in local democracy, and we present an apolitical political show providing information, context and background on a range of issues. Brought to you by experts on local politics, experts on the issues relevant to you, the voting public of Dunedin and wider Otago. And we also hope to have the voices of the candidates themselves. Kia ora, I'm Dr Barb, and today we present Part 2 of our Local Elections 2025 mini-series. Part 1 dealt with who can and can't vote, registration, and remember vote.nz is the place to go to check you are registered and that your registration details are correct. And we had some discussion on the general versus the Māori role with Janine Hayward, Professor Janine, I should say. Today, we have Janine back in the studio with us. And today, in part 2, we delve into the voting system we use. So it's all about STV, how to make sure your vote does what you intend, why we have STV, some of the pros and cons of this system, information about the candidates, how do you get information and what sort of information is supplied. And also, we'll have a little few details about what we're doing to help you find out some unbiased information about the candidates. And we also intend to have some time at the end to talk about the community boards, the sometimes forgotten cousin of local elections, why we have them and how to find out about who your candidates are. We're joined by Professor Janine Hayward from the Politics Department, University of Otago. Professor Hayward researches and teaches various aspects of New Zealand politics, including Treaty of Waitangi politics, New Zealand's constitution, electoral politics, environmental politics, and crucially for us today, local government politics. Janine also works on the comparative constitutional politics of Commonwealth nations and comparisons with Canada on Indigenous state relations. Professor Hayward has a BA from Canterbury and a BA Honours and PhD from Wellington. Welcome, kia ora, Janine, and thank you so much for joining us in the studio today.
Kia ora, it's a pleasure to be here again.
And it's fantastic to have someone who is an expert in all these areas to just quickly talk us through what we need to know to fully feel like we're confident in our voting, our choices, what we're doing, that we know what our votes mean. So once you've registered, and of course the easiest way to do this is all explained all the things about registering in our part 1, but the easiest way is of course to go to that vote.nz page, and it's the first step, so the easiest thing to do. And once you've registered, you've got the bit between your teeth, and we know from research that people like yourself are doing, that registering is a key thing.
Absolutely.
Once people are registered.
Yep. And to ask for help if you need it. Some people can feel a little intimidated, and they shouldn't. There are plenty of good people, as you said yourself, going into the library and asking some of those wonderful people for help. If you want to use the computer there, is a great way to
And of course, taking a bunch of friends along.
Absolutely. Do it with others.
Do it with a little registration
numbers.
Party. Get a pizza.
Exactly.
Not pizza in the library, perhaps. That I
Maybe not
won't be
pizza in the
popular. I won't be popular suggesting that.
Pizza after the library.
But of course, you can do it at home on your computer. If you don't have a computer, you can go in and use the library computers. And do it as a group, because the registering part, that's not secret. That's just a matter of, and it's really quick. It's 5 minutes.
And depending which generation you are, encourage your other generations in the family to do it too. So if you are a grandparent particularly, and you have an over 18-year-old grandchild, when you're thinking about voting, it's great to have a conversation with young people to encourage them to get along and vote also.
Absolutely. And interesting, you said last in part 1 that you can actually register if you're going to turn 18.
Yes. So from 17 you can pre-register to vote. If it's something that you think of doing in the year leading up to an election, just to get it out of the way, and you're going to be 18 in time, you can register any time in that year before.
Yeah, and once you're registered for the general election, you're registered for
Absolutely.
the local elections and vice
all comes
versa.
Off the same roll.
It's all the same role. So that's fantastic. And there's a little bit of information about the difference between the Maori role and the general role in part 1 of this series. But the big thing that we're going to talk today is about our voting system. Now, crucially, for the Dunedin area and the Otago wider area, we have actually 3 things that we are voting for in this local election. And they are the Otago Regional Council, the DCC. Actually, we've got 4 things. 4 things. Oh, I could see
That's all right.
Looking at me there, we've actually got 4 things.
We used to have more than that, but we have 4 now.
Yes. So, of course, there's not just the DCC councillors, but there's also the mayoral contest. And I was counting them as one thing, but it is not one thing. And then if you live in an area where there are community boards, then there's, of course, also the community boards. But not everyone has a community board.
No.
Vote. There's 6 of those, and you will know if you have one. How will you know that?
Because it will be part of your voting paper, depending on where you're registered to vote from, your address.
Right. So it's all written there, and you will know what you're doing.
Yep.
And broadly speaking, it's the Otago Peninsula, it's West Harbour, which is Ravensbourne right through Port Chalmers to Aramoana, Long Beach. It's the North Otago, I think it's called, which is kind of Blueskin Bay, all those places up North Otago, Strathtyre, Mosgiel and Saddle Hill.
That's exactly right.
Have I done 6?
Yes, I think you have.
And that's 6 people each. We'll come on to the community boards a bit later, but this year, all 4 of those votes have the same system. So this is the first year that has in fact been the case. And I think that makes it a lot simpler for people voting.
Absolutely.
So I'm very in favour of that.
Yep. It was never a good idea to have 2 different voting systems on the one ballot paper. We should have always avoided that, but we have it now. So that's tremendous. So,
and it is STV, and that replaces the first past the post system for the Otago Regional Council. And of course the Dunedin City Council and Mayor at one stage were first past the post, as was the general election.
A long time ago, over 20 years ago now.
Oh, 20 years, no, so it is a long time.
Dunedin was with Wellington was one of the original councils to change very early on. So the option arrived for councils to make this choice in the early 2000s, and Dunedin and Wellington changed then.
Right.
And other councils have done so since then. Some have changed back, others have joined, some have joined again. So because it's an option, it's a bit of a moving feast. But certainly Dunedin and Wellington have maintained that STV vote. And
obviously having the same voting system and that consistency over time helps people to understand the voting system. Absolutely. And that means that they are more likely to get what they want. And I wondered if you could just talk us through, firstly, how STV works.
Sure.
How to get what you want.
So when you ask the question, how does STV work, there are a number of ways you can answer that. So I'm going to
can you just answer
first of all about what a voter does
when
they want to vote?
I was just going to say exactly the thing. So just from a voter's point of view, what do you do? When you get the papers, how do they look and what do you do?
It's very simple. You are ranking the candidates that are there for you to select from in order of your preference. So the only kind of rules about it are that you can't leave any numbers out.
Right.
So don't go 1, 2, and then think, I don't like any of the others very much, so I'll go 10, 11, 12. Don't do that. It has to be a sequence of numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4.
5. And can you stop at any point?
You can stop at any point. So the thing to remember is when you rank somebody, you're basically saying, I would support them getting into office.
Right.
So once you get to the point that they're not candidates that you would want to see in council, you can stop ranking.
So is it better to stop ranking them?
Well, if you keep ranking, then you may actually support them getting into office. Because it may come if by some you may be one of the voters whose vote stays alive for a really long time as they're called iterations, basically the different vote counts happen. And if you get further and further down your queue, you will be helping anyone that's got a ranking eventually
So
get elected.
What I do is I rank the person I want the most to get in.
Good.
Number 1.
Perfect.
I give them my number 1 vote, and then I think, okay, if that person is super popular and they don't need my vote, or so they're already in, or if they don't get in, then this is my number 2 vote. And I go down like that and I do the first ones that are the people that I really want to get in. And then there's a whole group of people that I don't really know one way or the other, or that I think, they're kind of okay, but I'm not super keen on them. And then there's a group of people at the end that I really, really don't want in council.
Right.
And I find the bad ones almost as easy to rank as the good ones.
Yeah.
And so what I do is I just give the ones in the middle, which is maybe 10 or 12 in the middle of the group there, numbers sequentially, so that the ones at the end have that I really, really don't want to get in, always get less than them. Is that a good scheme or a bad scheme?
What that is saying in terms of the vote count is that you don't mind or any of these people being in council, but this is the order of preference you have for them. So if you really don't want some people to be on council, don't rank them.
Yeah.
And if they're a group that you think, I would rather any of these people got in than the ones I really don't like, then sure, go ahead and rank them. But remember that if it comes to it, that yours is one of the votes that hasn't been needed on any of the other people that you ranked higher up, it may help to elect one of those people.
Yeah.
So a ranking helps to elect people.
Yeah.
So I know there has been some discussion in the past about saying rank everybody and put the ones you don't like at the end. But I think you need to be aware of the fact that ranking is voting for. And if you withhold your ranking completely, then they are not getting any support from you.
That's true.
So I think one of the other things to clarify, when we look at the way that Dunedin voters vote, there is still a tendency for people to rank 14 because of the number of councillors. So I guess that's another thing to say to people. We got, particularly for voters who did used to vote using first past the post and we're used to ticking 14, you don't need to rank 14 people.
Right.
So you just rank the number of people that you like in the order that you like them in a sequence of numbers without a break.
So you can rank more than 14.
Absolutely. Or you could rank fewer than that.
You could just rank your top 3,
Absolutely.
for instance. Okay, these are the 3 people that I really like.
Yep.
I think if you just rank one person, there's quite a high likelihood that part of your vote might get wasted. Is that true?
Yeah, I guess it's a good example to use to show what STV is trying to achieve. So the other way of answering the question about how does STV work is to explain to voters what happens then with that ranking of voters, candidates that they've provided.
I think this is where there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding or misinformation about STV, because I hear people saying it's complicated or it's complex, and I think it's not at all. It's a very, very simple
system to vote with.
To actually use it for the person who's using it. And I think that it's the most likely system to give you exactly what you want.
Yes.
Because you get to express your preference on, if you like, everyone.
Yes.
And you get to rank everyone in order of how you would like them to go on. So you have no possibility of having a split vote, for instance.
No, exactly.
So
it is a very simple system to use to cast your vote.
For the voter, for the person going to the thing.
Ranking.
Just rank them.
Absolutely. And you're right. You can't split votes with STV. So the other thing that I always say, another thing that can make voters anxious about local government elections when they're used to voting in the past with first past the post, and they know that with that voting system you can split votes. So in other words, you can end up letting somebody be elected because too many people spread their vote around other people of a like mind.
So it's when you have two similar candidates.
Exactly.
Neither of whom,
right? You often come across that.
Yeah. So you'd have
saying,
two candidates.
I'm not going to run for mayor because I don't want to split the vote and let such and such win. So STV was designed specifically to overcome the deficiencies of first past the post, particularly in elections like mayoral elections and multi-member elections. So when you're voting for a bunch of people.
Yeah. Which is, of course, all of our ORC, because we have a ward with 6 people in it.
Yep.
It's the community boards, which are also 6 people, and it's the council, which is 14 people.
Yep.
So STV is clearly a superior, objectively,
And when
system
we say superior, I mean, there are advantages and disadvantages to all systems.
Right.
So one of the advantages that First Past the Post had was that it was a very simple system to vote with, and it was a very simple system for voters to understand how the votes had been counted.
Right.
STV is a very simple system, and voters tell us this, for voters to vote with.
Yeah.
But some voters do, understandably, find it difficult to understand how the votes are counted. And it's done with a computer. So that shows it's not something that you can do in the way of piling papers up. And, you can't just say, this paper is for that person, this is for that, this is for that. Partly because that type of vote count ends up not really conveying what voters' preferences were anyway, how the public voted. So one of the real strengths of STV, aside from the fact that it is a little bit more complicated explaining how the vote is counted, is that voters should be confident that it does a very good job of translating how they voted into who gets elected. So we have a spectrum in politics and political science. We've got this kind of, on the one end, systems that do a really good job of showing who people voted for, and on the other end, systems that do a really bad job of that.
Right.
So STV is one of the systems that's closer to the end that does a good job. So if we could get all of Dunedin into the stadium and go through a system of raising hands to vote, so we really knew how people felt about candidates, STV can deliver an outcome that's much more like that you can have kind of iterations of thinking, who's the most popular person here? Okay, they're going to get way more votes than they need in this to get elected. So we know they've got elected. Let's set them aside. For those of you who voted for them but didn't need to, who else do you want out of the candidates that we can see? So, and for those of you who voted for somebody really unpopular who didn't stand a chance, bless you, but now we'll give you another chance
But I think
in your second or third ranking to influence the vote of somebody else. So we know that the outcome of an STV election makes way more people happy about who their council is because they can see somebody that they helped to elect.
And I was just going to say, I think that on those, the bless you people, I think it's really good as well.
Absolutely.
Because they can see how much support they had or didn't have, but you can, if you really want that person to be, if they're their first person,
vote for them.
You can still give them your vote, knowing that if they don't get enough votes, your vote's not wasted.
Absolutely.
So for me, that when you're looking at something like a council, local body elections, when you're really looking for representation, I think, because a lot of people, they don't want to vote for the person they really want because they're afraid that person won't get elected and their vote will get wasted.
So that's STV is an insurance policy on your vote, that if you give your vote to somebody who got more votes than they needed to get elected, then your vote isn't surplus to requirements. It'll still count for something else.
So it's not wasted because too many people voted.
And if on the other hand you gave it to somebody that you really like and you knew they probably didn't have much of a chance, but you wanted to demonstrate that anyway, that's not going to be wasted either.
Right.
Because when they are removed from the race, those votes will be redistributed to their second or third or whatever preferences.
And that's when that number two comes in.
Exactly.
So your number two person goes in there and your number three person.
So when you're sitting down looking at all your options, you don't need to think strategically, you need to think honestly. Who do I really like? Who do I think would be a good councillor? And then you rank them in that order. So regardless of how popular they're going to be for other people.
I really like how you put that, that you don't need to think strategically
no, just think
or
honestly.
Tactically. You just need to think honestly. Yep. Who do I really want? Who do I like? Who has the same values as me?
Exactly.
Who represents what I believe in?
However popular or unpopular they might be with other groups.
That's really interesting. And I mean, that's kind of
that's what you hope an electoral system would be.
Exactly. That to me, that really is what democracy is about, isn't it? You've got people, and people often say, one vote, one person. And in effect, an STV system, the S stands for single, right?
And the T stands for transferable. So it is literally the description of what happens is in the name.
Yeah, so you really do have
you are
one
only
vote.
casting one vote.
Right.
So again, you're not able to multiply your influence over a bunch of people who get elected. You are electing one person, but that vote that you have is going to land where it's needed, right? So it kind of travels around a little bit until it rests where it's most needed.
Yeah.
And that's happening for everybody. It's a really... So we know that by the time because of the way the quota works, we can literally say what percentage of the Dunedin population wasn't able to have their vote influence anybody to get elected.
Oh, right.
Who are still in the vote count. So if you only voted for 3 people and they weren't elected, and then your vote is wasted, essentially.
Right.
But because of the single transferable vote, we get that proportion of wasted votes down to something that's very small, like just over 6%.
Right.
So everybody else whose vote's still kind of active and has had some effect can look at the council and say, I can see my influence there. I can see the person
I actually voted for someone who's on that council.
And maybe a few in terms of little bits of votes.
Right.
So.
And to get that sort of 6% of wasted votes, to get that even lower, it's to encourage people to just rank more people?
Yeah, well, actually, to get the number of votes that are still helping to elect people, yes. Rank more to keep your vote alive. What you would need to do, that percentage gets a little bit complicated now, but that percentage of the vote that isn't used is more about the number of candidates that we have standing.
Oh, right.
So you divide your 100% by the number of candidates plus 1, so that you've always got a little surplus of votes, sadly, that can't count, so that we can get everybody over the quota in terms of getting themselves elected.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's a system, as I said, it was designed to try and overcome what was a really obvious
flaw
with first past the post. And it happens in 2 ways. So with candidate elections, it means that you can have a kind of a block of voters, really, who are quite like-minded, who could do 14 ticks, let's say, if we kept it at large and we were all voting for the same group. Heaven forbid, because that would be terrible. But you would have 14 ticks. You could have a group of maybe 35, but sometimes not even that, % of the population who thinks the same way, who can influence the election of all of those candidates, because there's no other group big enough to elect anybody else.
Right.
So we always see minority candidates being elected rather than candidates who can actually demonstrate that they've got a fair percentage of the vote.
Right.
And it's even clearer in mayoral elections under first past the post, where you can have mayors elected, and this happens all the time in mayoral elections around New Zealand for councils using first past the post, on a minority of votes. Sometimes
so someone's
40%,
26% and they actually win.
They're the biggest group of votes, but 74% of the population didn't want them. So what STV does is say, good start by you to have the biggest group, but we're going to keep counting votes until we make sure that you have 50% of the population support. So in that case, you're knocking out the least popular candidates, and those votes are being redistributed until one of the candidates passes the 50% of the vote threshold. So sometimes you hear candidates say, and this happens in a lot of the STV elections, candidates who misunderstand the way that STV works saying, I was ahead on the first iteration of votes. On the first vote, I had the first I had the largest number of first preference votes.
I have heard that.
It's not fair that I'm not mayor.
Yes. And they have just misunderstood how STV works.
Yes, maybe you would have been elected under first past the post, but you would have been a minority mayor with the majority of the population. We don't know whether they had supported you or not. So STV tests that out and says, have you really got 50% support? We're not going to elect you. We're not going to consider you elected until the votes show that you do.
Yeah. So people who say that, sadly, have misunderstood. Hopefully it's just a genuine mistake that they don't understand the system that we are using, which is very sad.
And it's also just a different way of thinking about the winners, though, I think. So there is, for those who have a preference for first past the post, they still, they make the case that it is a easy, it's an uncomplicated and very clear demonstration of who has the biggest share of votes, even if it's not a majority.
Even
of
if it's not a majority,
yeah. And that there are winners and losers, and that's how the cookie crumbles. So it may be a misunderstanding of STV. It may just be a preference for that kind of
I mean, I think if you were saying
system.
Things like that, given that our current voting system is STV, and you're still saying things like, "Oh, but I had the highest this, that," then that's either deliberately confusing the voting populace, or you are just not understanding how our voting system works, either of which I think is a bit sad in someone who's standing for council.
Well, and this came up just recently with the Wellington is using STV as well, as I said before.
Yeah.
And when Andrew Little said that he would be putting his hat in the ring, there was a lot of discussion about what that meant in terms of splitting the vote and what did STV do for that.
And it doesn't mean anything in terms of splitting the vote, because you can't split the vote with STV.
So it didn't make any difference to any of the other candidates in terms of whether or not they should reconsider. But what was said again then was some observations about the fact that Wellington has changed its mayor a lot in recent elections, and was it the electoral system doing that? Which, of course, no, because an electoral system shouldn't be distorting what's happening, which is the point.
It's just reflecting what the people are
might
saying.
have. Exactly. So what that's saying is Wellington keeps changing its mind about its mayor, and STV is a good mechanism to reflect that in who's getting elected.
Yeah, because I would have thought that there would be less inclination or less possibility of the mayor changing willy-nilly. Like, it would be more stable system under STV because it's preferences of the population as a whole.
As long as that remains stable, then yes. But if it doesn't,
whereas I was thinking with first past the post, you can get this situation where you've got 26% and you've split the vote, or you split the vote the other way just by who's standing as the candidates in this election as opposed to last election or the next election. So I would think that just on first principles, first past the post would be more susceptible to changing all the time.
And again, it can produce some quite big swings in vote that are disproportionate to the way the community's actually voting.
Feeling.
So it's just harder to tell in first past the post elections what the public actually said in terms of who got elected, whereas in STV you can tell. So if you have the same mayor for a number of elections, it's because the community, votes
under
STV, that's just because the community has kept its support with that person. Overall, Yeah,
no, it's interesting. And, for me, I'm a huge proponent of STV because I can't see how there's any benefit to a system that is more likely to, that kind of encourages tactical voting and strategic voting and people having to double think what they think and what they guess things are going to happen, and whether one person's popularity depends on someone else. Because we want to encourage as many good people to stand as possible.
Absolutely.
So I think that, having the choice of A and B, even if they're quite similar, is good. And we shouldn't be putting more emphasis on pre-selection of candidates. That's something that we want the community as a whole to be saying, actually, hey, I like A slightly better than B. But I like both of them a heap better than C, so I don't want some amorphous behind-the-scenes people deciding whether A or B is the person who stands against C.
And I think for candidates, STV is also a good system to have in place when you are running for election, because, as we know, there are huge differences in the resources that candidates have when they run for election.
Especially at local body elections, because you haven't got that big.
So you will see some campaigns that clearly have a lot of good resourcing and others that don't. The good thing about single transferable vote is it levels that out. So a candidate who has used a lot of resources and gains a lot more popularity than they need to get elected kind of doesn't get a bonus for that, right? So if they get more votes than they needed, then their surplus votes will transfer to other preferences. And likewise, for a candidate who only has a small number of resources, all that candidate needs to do is get, and I should have checked the number, 6-point-something% of the vote to get themselves elected. So they can work in their community, in their part of Dunedin, with the people that know them in whatever way, whatever drives them in terms of why they want to be in council. If it's because they come from a particular part of Dunedin and they want to be a councillor who speaks for the whole of Dunedin from that place, whatever it is, you don't need to out-resource the big resources. You just need to target a percentage of the population that will support you and get you over that quota in terms of ranking you first or second, or
and that's actually really good
ranked.
advice for candidates out there.
Well, it's a good system for making sure, and again, it overcomes the problem of first past the post that it tends to overrepresent some groups and underrepresent others because of who gets seen and who votes and whose votes
I think,
count.
Particularly at local government level, it's really important to have that representation.
Yep.
And, whether
Absolutely
it's
crucial.
spatial or by communities.
Exactly.
Or,
Yep.
And particularly, I would say, in a population like Dunedin, where we've got
all kinds of different issues, different communities.
It's quite a spread out town, and we've got a really big group in the student population, which is
who have
one
always
group.
struggled to get any students
I don't know
elected.
if we've ever had a student.
No, we've had some
elected.
kind of youth adjacent councillors at times. We've had some student candidates stand, but they haven't yet. They've got close in the past, but haven't quite made it.
Yeah.
So
and
there will come a time when
that
they
you
do.
were saying is definitely less than 20,000.
Yes.
So if all of the students voted for one candidate,
sadly they have opinions of their own.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean. I know that the student candidates hope that they may.
It is actually a big block. So if they could, and I think one of the biggest
what
problems.
Is that, a fifth of Dunedin's population? I'm not sure what we're up to.
It
so
is.
A fifth
It's
of
like
council
100. Yeah, no.
Yeah. So
it
we're
is
not quite there.
It is quite a big proportion
It
of
is.
Dunedin's population. I think the biggest challenge or obstacle for students is getting them
to vote.
to
Although that's
register
getting a
and
bit
to
better.
vote.
Yeah, students are definitely
so definitely if you're
the
listening to
local
this and you
communities.
know some students, please encourage them to check
Absolutely.
their registration and to vote. Yeah, that's the big thing. And again, we'll just say that again, just that the page, it's just vote.nz. It's so simple to find.
It is.
And it's really a 5-minute thing to type it in. Now, STV, do we need to say anything else about STV?
No, very simple. Vote honestly. You don't need to rank 14. Make sure you have a sequence of numbers
They have to be in order.
It has to be in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however
6,
far you want to go.
Basically, it's until you stop knowing who the person is and whether you like them or not.
If you don't rate them, don't rank them.
If you don't rate them, don't rank them. That's a good tagline.
Thank you very
isn't
much.
it? If you don't rate them,
I'll
don't
give you
rank
that one,
them.
Barb.
I like that. If you don't rate them, don't rank them. I like that. That's really good. And I think I would like people to stop voting on name recognition.
Do some homework, but we know that's hard to do.
Yeah.
It can be hard, so good to have local media doing as much as they can to promote.
We are hoping, we are going to
candidates.
send out an invitation to all the candidates who are standing for DCC and Mayor and give them 10 minutes of airtime. We're going to ask them all the same questions. We're not going to tell any of them what the questions are beforehand. It'll be a mixture of sort of 60-second questions and short one-word answers. We are going to drop all of the 10-minute recorded interviews all at the same time on podcast. So they all get the same amount of time.
Excellent.
We will start recording those after the nominations close on the 1st of August, and we will, because then we'll know exactly how many nominations we've got. We have 2 weeks set aside to record them, because it's quite a lot of recording based on past number of candidates.
Yes, we've always had high candidacy. That's another good STV.
We have a lot of candidates, yeah.
Factor.
And that it has been said to be one of the drawbacks of STV is that there can be so many candidates that it's difficult for people to know about them.
So don't get overwhelmed by it. Just, make a start, as you say. At least think about the ones that you do know. Fabulous to have your podcasts and other things to go to if people want to do homework on others.
And the ODT usually does a thing.
Exactly.
And there's usually several Meet the Candidates evenings arranged around town, and hopefully we can organise one of those as well.
But not to be overwhelmed by the number of candidates.
Yeah, because you don't have to know about everyone.
No, you don't, and because you don't have to rank everybody.
You do have to know about the people that you rate.
Please do.
You're only
please know who
ranking those you rate.
Exactly.
Yes, that's interesting. I love that tagline.
Good.
Rank those you rate. Yes. So there you go. And when you get your voting papers, which will be about the 9th of September, because that's when postal voting opens, there'll be a booklet inside it. And that only gives you 120 words and a picture.
Yep.
It's not a lot.
No.
And most people say fairly bland things.
They do.
That are fairly similar. So my advice is, as Janine was saying, go out there and find out about the people.
What's unusual about the local candidate bios is how much they strive to be apolitical.
Yeah,
so it really
I find that very
it
strange.
gives very little indication to voters how they would think and what they would do around the council table, and I think people struggle with that. So something that's longer form, like your 10 minutes each, I think that's going to be enormously valuable for people to get a little bit of a better sense of how those people might act.
Yeah,
if
what
they
their values are, and
exactly.
what they think about various things. And of course, that's even more so when we come down to, so there's the mayor. That's one person who's being elected.
So the only presidential type election that we have in New Zealand. And again, we were talking about this last time. We don't have party politics.
We don't vote for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, we don't have party politics in local candidates and local government. So we have to elect our mayor separately because there's no group that can say, promote their leader to become leader.
I mean, I guess in theory we could have the councillors decide who's the mayor.
Yep.
But goodness me, that'd be a nightmare, wouldn't it?
Well, we've just always done it separately. So yes, our mayor is like our presidents.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it's interesting that we do that at local government level, but we don't do that at national level.
No.
We just allow whoever happens to be
the party system leader. Is a really strong part of our politics nationally.
Yeah. So, but it's very strange in some ways because when the election runs, someone can be the leader of the party who, the day after or 2 days after is no longer the leader for whatever reason.
Exactly.
And that's totally out of the voters' control at that point. It's just up to the party. It's a lot of faith to put in the parties, isn't it?
It is.
Oh, my goodness.
So, anyway, yes, we get to vote for our mayor separately from our
And, of course, that
council.
runs sort of with the council because quite often the mayor stands for council as well. As soon as... So they run the mayoral race. They sort of count those votes first. It's all running together. You vote on the same papers.
Exactly.
But
they just remove the mayor.
They just remove the mayor because essentially
vote.
they've already been voted in as the mayor. I mean, I suppose it would be possible that someone could be voted for mayor and lose in the council votes, but that would never.
That would be unusual.
Would be very unusual. Anyway, it doesn't matter because it doesn't
anything
count.
Can happen in New Zealand politics.
Because
I have learned.
Yeah, they count all those votes for mayor. Once the mayoral votes are counted, then if that person was standing for council, and of course you can stand for mayor and not stand for council.
Yes, you can.
Because you can say, okay, well, I think I would be a good mayor, but actually, if people don't support me as mayor, I think it would be disruptive to the council for me to stand on council. So, I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable position to take, and you could do that. Gosh, it's quite strange, isn't it? Anyway, yes. So, going through that, they've changed the boundaries for the Otago Regional Council this year. So that means
that's a population thing.
Yeah, so that's a population thing, and that kind of happens sort of in the background a bit. All the time.
It does.
And
it's important that we make sure that there are roughly the same number of people in each group of people voting for something.
Yeah. And I suppose that's when you have these wards or constituencies. So you've got kind of the Otago Regional Council is made up of 14, am I right? Councillors who all get voted for this year by STV. But we in Dunedin don't vote for all of those positions. So it's just assumed that Dunstan, Moeraki, Molyneux and Dunedin will have kind of different things that they're and different.
I mean, it covers
it's a very big area.
Region.
I think it's one of the biggest regional councils
is one of the biggest
in the
local
country.
Government.
Yeah. So they have wards, and I don't know, is that decided by referendum? How do they decide if there are going to be wards or not?
So for something like the Dunedin City Council, they do representation reviews every 5 years or so, and that's the point at which a decision is made about what shape the electorates of the wards or boundaries will be, not the external boundary. So we can't change what Dunedin is in terms of its perimeter for the DCC.
Or the Otago Regional Council.
Otago Regional Council. But within that, what are the representation arrangements going to be?
Because in theory, we could have wards within the DCC, right? So we could have, somewhere, for instance, like South Dunedin could be a ward.
Yes, exactly. Again, a strength of STV is that you don't need to do that quite so much.
Because in fact, someone could run as I'm the South Dunedin candidate,
and
just really campaign
in South Dunedin,
for instance, not South Dunedin for an example. It could be anywhere.
Yeah, I mean there are. Should we go in this direction? There are some arguments to saying that it's still a good idea to have wards even with STV. There's a kind of a sweet spot in electoral systems with what works well. I think it comes back to the point we were making before about the number of candidates because of electing 14 people. Right. The number of candidates that are in that group that we're looking through. So, whoever is doing the next representation review for Dunedin will think about this again and say, is this the ideal arrangement, or should we go back to perhaps having quite large wards, maybe with 5 and 4 or something like that?
I was thinking more with the Otago Regional Council because they used to be first past the post, and they had wards, and now they've changed the voting system to STV, but they still have wards.
They still have wards, yes.
So potentially they could get rid of those wards.
They may, or they may decide that it's because
such a big area.
Yeah, it's such a big area, and because of the nature of the politics in the region, it's better to still make sure that some of those regions are represented, even with STV.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on to the community boards, because they do sometimes become the poor cousin because so much of the media is taken up with the council and the mayor race. What is the point of community boards? Why do we have them?
So community boards were introduced back in the late 1980s when New Zealand went through a really huge local government reform. We scaled down from heaps and heaps and heaps of local government to larger, fewer local government areas.
So I think at the time, for instance, Port Chalmers had its own mayor and council. But it was really tiny.
It was tiny. So the Labour government in the 1980s did a huge amount of change in New Zealand, as we all know. And one of the things that they did was thinking about resource management in particular. So that was the same kind of period of time that led to the Resource Management Act in the early 1990s.
Right.
So that changed all our legislation. The government also wanted to change our local institutions for environmental management and thought that it was much more efficient and better for decision making to have fewer local government entities and make them slightly bigger.
Right.
So they created this two-tier system of our regional councils and our district or territorial councils as well.
Which is the DCC.
Which is the DCC and like the Otago Regional Council.
Yeah.
So community boards came out of that as a kind of a gesture to some of particularly the urban areas like ours, which was probably confronted with some of the biggest change. As you say, we had some really tiny councils in parts of our community that felt that they were very distinct, had a very distinct identity and issues to be protected.
That, like
Absolutely,
is a quite
well,
a
and
big
you think
area.
Back to what the Dunedin demographic was like then. We've sprawled around a lot since then.
Yeah.
But in the late 80s, there were quite distinct communities.
Yeah. And they've kind of joined up.
They have joined up a bit. Yeah. So the community boards arrived out of that, really. Right. So when we had these larger councils put in, the I'm going to say local government commission, but I don't even know who it would have been at that stage who was organising these things, gave community boards or created or established community boards in some areas. So they're not everywhere in the country. Not all areas have community boards. Some started out with them and have since got rid of them.
I think Auckland's got 21.
Yeah, so those are local boards, and that's kind of
slightly
different. Yeah, everything about Auckland's local council is slightly different from the rest of the country.
Auckland just always have to be slightly different.
Exactly, it's a slightly different stuff going on there.
Different.
So different scale. So so our local boards, our community boards came from that, and have pretty much persisted since then. And again, it's an issue that comes up in representation reviews. The thing about community boards, they do fantastic work.
So what do they do?
Well, so they do literally community politics and community work, and they are advocates for the communities that they represent right at the grassroots level.
Right. So they're communicating what the community wants,
yes,
what their community wants to the council.
Exactly. And they have a councillor that sits on their board.
Yeah.
As a kind of a conduit to that too. And they are funded, so they get some council funding to do particular activities in their communities, so they can have a little bit of independence, have a little bit of initiative for things that they think are going to be meaningful in their communities. And as you said, they are in some areas but not others. So, when I think about local government and I think about communities and community interests, I think one of the good questions to ask, if we had the money for it, wouldn't it be great if everywhere had a community board?
Yeah,
but they don't.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that still puzzles me is they cover some communities now, and I'm not questioning the great work they do, but it's not entirely clear now whether they do have a distinctive identity or set of issues that are different from other areas that don't have a community board to represent them.
Yeah.
So the best scenario would be that everywhere in Dunedin has them, but we can't afford that.
They're sort of the areas that are on the outskirts of Dunedin.
And for obvious reasons, because that's where originally it was felt that there was needed additional representation so that those areas didn't get lost in the new big council structure. And I guess, every 5 years we return to that question of, is this the best way to represent Dunedin? And it comes up every time about community boards. Are they in the right places? Do we still need them?
I do wonder.
Is it fair that some have them and some don't? And of course, those in the community boards are fierce advocates for keeping them. I would be too. I live in an area that has a community board, and I can see
I should say I do
the good
too,
work that they do.
The last...
But
I have actually been a member, elected member of the community board. I should probably declare that as a conflict
so you know
of interest
the good work that they do.
Well, yeah,
but there are many communities in Dunedin that are doing good work, and they don't all have council support or a community board
and I
to fund that.
do wonder at the fairness of it. And I understand that the more you have, the more it costs.
Exactly.
But if we think this is a useful thing to have, then it does seem that, in fairness, we should either have them or not have them.
Exactly.
And I guess also rethinking, they are where they are for historical reasons. So possibly rethinking the boundaries of them and the funding that goes to them and how and what the purpose of them is, and all of those sort of things.
So those are exactly the questions that come up in representation reviews. Yeah. So the idea in those reviews is, and the Dunedin City Council has always, and I should say too, declaring conflicts that I have chaired one of those representation reviews in the dark past.
Yeah.
So the question that those reviews are asked is, what are your communities of interest, and are they well represented with your current representation arrangement? So it gets right back to the basics of, well, what is Dunedin as a community?
Yeah.
What are the needs of different areas? Are they the same? Are we simply now a very urban spread community with very limited kind of rural community?
Yeah.
Does it matter where you live now? Does that change your interests and your representation?
And I guess also is rural and urban the biggest split as well?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you could split the population of Dunedin based on, socio-economic or... there's many different ways that you could say we need representation.
Absolutely.
And you want to sort of make sure that those big blocks are represented.
Yep,
and I
definitely.
guess that, and an easy way to do it is kind of geographical.
Yes,
spatial.
It is.
It's that way, but
yeah. And also, of course, for all communities, including Dunedin, is the question of Māori as part of the community, and how effectively Māori are represented. And that, to go back to our previous conversation, is where discussions about Māori wards come in, and what the best way is to ensure that Māori have engagement, particularly given the difference in the demographics in different regions. Whether you are, whether Māori are 5% of the population or 55% of the population, what does that look like in terms of your representation structures?
And of course that goes back to the Treaty of Waitangi, where Māori at the time were guaranteed, when they were signing the Treaty of Waitangi, partnership.
Yes.
They were guaranteed representation.
I guess it does go back to the treaty, but I think even without that, it's a matter of, it's a question of, because countries without that kind of treaty have the same conversation. With Indigenous peoples, what does that representation look like, really? So yes, it's probably many different ways of looking at it, but it's a question that always comes up.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I think that underlying everything is just having the best system that gives the most representative governance at local level.
Absolutely.
And that's really the basis, the foundation of democracy, is that people are represented.
Yep.
And anything that is a challenge to that is anti-democratic.
I believe so. But I guess the debate is what is a challenge to it. So people have different views on what democracy is. So, depending on where you stand on these things, you may think that you are acting in the interests of democracy and disagreeing with other people who also think they're acting in the interests of democracy. I always say to my students, if I were to ask you, who thinks democracy is a good idea, and I required everyone to agree on it before we left the room, that they're all like, no, they will put their hands up. Yes, democracy is a great idea. We agree. And then I say, okay, we also have to agree on a definition of exactly what democracy means before we leave the lecture theatre. And you can never achieve that. So,
really? So
democracy, generally speaking, I never shut them in. It's always just a threat. They do look slightly frightened. But the idea being we agree in principle. We've got this idea that we all support and talk about a lot, but we're often meaning quite different things by it, which is why when we come down to the details of it, we get a bit unstuck in terms of disagreeing. Unstuck in a good way. We always ought to be keeping on debating and questioning and revisiting these decisions we're making.
What sort of things do they kind of go disagree on over democracy?
So it's a good question. So one of the big things is about the power of the majority in a democracy, right? So is a democracy simply the largest number of votes for something, or is it more than that? So there's always a split of views between those who think it's as simple as saying who agrees with this and who doesn't. So you would want to just, it's a referendum-based idea of democracy. And others who say it's really important that the majority can't hold everybody else to ransom. Yeah. So the other part of a democracy that matters, that others hold very dear, is the idea that we protect minority interests, specifically because they can always get outvoted. Yeah. So there are some things that we shouldn't let the majority decide on because without meaning ill intent, they may be uninformed about an issue that impacts a minority and vote accordingly with, and have poor outcomes for groups in our communities. So in terms of a disagreement about democracy, I think that's one of the easiest ones to highlight and say, and people won't agree on that. Yeah. Some people will never agree on protecting minority interests and others will never agree that it's a majoritarian gig. Yeah,
it has to be somewhere in the middle. But I think that if you are elected and you are in the majority, I think one way to tell is just to think to yourself, if I was a minority person, if I was in the smallest minority, would I still think this was fair? Mm. And if you can't truly say, yes, I would still think that was fair if I was the smallest minority, then you shouldn't really be voting for that. Because, you take the most drastic situation. You could have a majority of people who say, Doug over there stinks. We all think he should be killed, right? Poor Doug's only got one vote. He's got nothing to do about it. He's off to the chopping block.
Yeah, there are some things that really shouldn't go to a vote. Yeah. That would probably be fairly close to the top of the list.
It's a fairly fatuous kind of an example, but it shows the extremes of it, right?
Absolutely. But there's just to go back to your point, there's a great exercise that we do in politics, which is exactly what you just did. It's called the veil of ignorance. So what you do is you don't know who you are and you're writing a policy. And what I mean by you don't know who you are is you don't know whether you're a minority or a majority. You don't know whether you're a man or a woman. You don't know what age you are. You don't know what ethnicity you are. You don't know whether you are a citizen or from somewhere else. And you're asked to write a policy about something, housing, education, health. And it's a great exercise in thinking, how am I going to write a policy that's going to give me the best chance of being treated fairly when I know who I am, when that veil of ignorance is removed and I find out I'm a 62-year-old woman who'd arrived here from another country.
I'm not mentioning pay equity here at all.
No, exactly. So, it's a great, I think your example is a really good way of thinking about how we can think about politics fairly.
Dug in the corner. If it turns out that you're dug in the corner, you don't want that.
You really seriously wanted to make sure that policy was fair.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Hey, thank you so much for coming along, Janine.
Always a pleasure.
I'm sorry about some of my ridiculous comments, but if people just ignore the things I've said and just stick to what Janine said, they will get a lot of really useful information, I think, and thank you very much. It's great that we've got STV here, and it's great to hear from someone who knows all about all the systems all over the world that actually...
Yeah,
it's a good system.
We shouldn't take it for granted. It is a good system for us all.
It's a good system. And, it's a system that is simple for the voter to use.
Absolutely. Get out and vote.
That's really good. Just rank those things. And what's our tagline? If you don't rate them, don't rank them. If you don't rate them, don't rank them. Which, the opposite is obviously true. If you rate them, rank them. Which means get out and vote. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. And ka kite to everyone out there. Go out and register. The Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences presents the Local Election 2025 special. Our aim is to demystify the voting process, encourage participation in local democracy. We present an apolitical political show, providing unbiased information, context and background on a range of issues. A refresher course on how to register, how to stand for election or nominate somebody else, how STV works and how to make sure your vote represents your values. Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society NZ Te Aparangi. Available on podcasts wherever you listen and from the Otago Access website, oar.org.nz. You can support this local election special by becoming a member of the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society Te Aparangi.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.